Hey, good afternoon, guys. This one is another members only stream, right? So, what I want to do is just, I guess, kind of emphasize some of the key points and factors, right? And I know for some of you've obviously kind of grasped it. I know others are kind of still struggling, and I've had a few kind of direct messages and so on recently on this. And I think it's just a question of maybe overthinking it, over kind of complicating it, over yeah, maybe just kind of putting too much emphasis on everything kind of being aligned and everything being right. Okay, so what I want to do is just to kind of summarize, right? If I was to look at where we are right now, I'm not going to put anything on the charts, no drawings, no nothing, right? To start with, I want to kind of start from a completely fresh viewpoint. So what I want to do is I want to look out at the bigger. Let's actually go to a monthly time frame, right, to make this even easier to kind of comprehend. And I don't want this video to be a long one, but if it ends up being a little bit longer, then it's probably worthwhile given the kinds of conversations that I've had recently. So look, when I'm assessing this, you might say, oh, well, this much data is kind of way too much in terms of going back to 2021. It's 2001. But the reality is, I'm not looking at the data there. What I'm looking at is what are the structural points? What are the range parts? Bigger picture, right? So if I was to draw this, I've clearly got a nice high and I've got a nice low, which means everything inside of this is currently an internal play, right? An internal range. Now, for me, if I was to take this as a bigger time frame, I'd be expecting, a very deep pullback into the range, and then ultimately a power play up. This is basically a one. This is a two. I'd be expecting a three if I was to look at purely this, right? Now, obviously, that particular point in time, again, is way too much data. But what it's done in less than 10 seconds is just given me an idea in terms of where that annual, where the decade type trend and trade is, right? So we've ultimately been trading down from this particular move, right? Now, what we've then gone and done is as we start to look a little bit closer, we've created this low, right? We know that we have this high, and we've yet to take that out. We've moved up, we've come down, right? And we've now since changed the character. So there's clearly some kind of uptrend on the horizon. Now, what I'm doing, and the reason that I'm doing this, and I'm just kind of walking through this manually, is this isn't a lot of technical. I'm not looking at levels or anything yet. What I'm now doing is just getting a feel for, okay, well, this does seem like it could be an uptrend. So if this is an uptrend, right, let's assume that the uptrend is only part of a pullback to a bigger downtrend. We know we're in a bigger downtrend. Where is that uptrend likely to come to? Well, if we were to look at the supply and the demand, so this is the first area in terms of the supply, right? We know we've got a nice supply there on a monthly time frame. It's unmitigated, right? We literally dropped from it and we've never been back to that. Right? Now, at the moment, the way that I'm reading this is this particular low was clearly broken with this low forming, right? Which would suggest, if I was to look back at where that last low was, this particular high becomes my strong high in the equation. Right? So what I now have is I have a monthly strong high. Okay. Now that obviously sits just above the current supply level that ultimately drove this price down. Okay. So in summary, what I now have is a week monthly low, right? And that's just on the premise that if we were to carry on down. Right? So for my monthly bias to change to be extremely bullish, right, I really want this one taken as this is the external external, right? And the reason that that is external is obviously at the moment from my current range, we are only internal from the prior move, right? Which means this was external. This move here took out clearly this set of lows, right? So With all that being said, I've now given myself a much bigger picture, bias and understanding in terms of where we are. Right? We've just taken external liquidity. We're currently in a position that we've taken a down move. We've pulled back into the range because my range was obviously here to here. Right? We can now look at this range and say, okay, well, what is actually going on? Well, we've made a high. We've come down, made a low. We've come down. This time we made a lower high, followed by a lower low. So in theory, if I was to draw this out, I've got one move here. This doesn't really count. I'm going to draw it in anyway. We failed because this is only internal. We failed to take out that high, and we've come down and made a lower low. Right? So if I was to draw that in a summary form, what I'm actually saying is I have this move here to this move here, right, to potentially this move here, which means a run, a pullback, a run. Okay. Now, obviously, at this particular point, I'm looking at this and saying to myself, okay, what's this got to do with a 1 minute time frame? I'm currently on a monthly chart. Well, all I'm taking from this, and this is the kind of note that I'm looking to take, is that we have, first of all, a strong monthly high. I have a supply up on the monthly, seeking external. Right? That is literally all I am taking from this chart. Right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into my first, leave that one out, and I'm going to put this into my first box or first range in terms of the group. So let's put that one all the way down there to there. That's my monthly group. Right? So this is a lot of information, but as you can see, once you get into the habit of this, this takes seconds to run through. Right? So now what I want to do is I want to work on exactly the same premise, but now on the smaller time frame. This is a weekly time frame. So on that weekly time frame, what I'm doing is I can put my monthly back on. I already know obviously where we are, what we're doing. What I'm looking at on the monthly, the weekly now, is a very similar picture. We've had this large move down. I'm ignoring all the noise in the middle. We've had this pullback. We've had this large move down. Now, we could deem this as a pullback. However, this move failed to take out this low. Okay, so if I was to guess right now, we're currently doing this directly, right, rather than this internal structure. That'll come at a later date, right? Now, at this particular point, what I'm looking at is, okay, if I can see that we're currently in that uptrend move, I don't care if it's a pullback or if it's a new change of character and up we're actually going. What I do care about is the range being from here to here, right? Which means I can start to identify what's actually going on in the smaller picture. Right? Now, obviously, that being said, if we were to mark up a very similar process, this low was taken, right? Which means my current range is from these highs. Well, that particular high is this particular range, right? So I have this over here. Now what I have is this confirmed low, right? So at the moment, I'm currently in a position where I kind of have a relatively strong weekly move as well, right? Now, at this particular point, I'm not looking to trade this, I'm not looking to use this other than what's going on. Well, this one is probably the same one as my monthly situation, right? So what I want to do now is step in a level, and this is where the terminology becomes very awkward, because like I do with the Elliott waves, I'm not looking at the super cycles and the grand super cycles. I'm looking at this in a 3 time frame kind of concept, right? So I tend to use monthly, weekly, daily, rather than thinking, oh, this is a super cycle and this is the annual cycle, and it can get very complicated. What I'm looking for is more the large, the medium, and the small. right? So regardless of what label I stick on them, it's, you know, small, medium, large, large, medium, small, right? Which way I look at this. So with that being said, from this particular low, what I want to do is now try to work out what we've done since that move. Well, there was our real change of character to the upside, right? We then come down, we then move back up, we then come down, we then move up, right? Now, at this particular point, I can draw that all as one move, right? Then what we have is this changes the character back to the downside, which means I can draw this as one move, okay? Now, at this particular point, we have a pullback. This is clearly the highest point of that pullback, which means I can draw this all as one move. I can draw this all as one move, and I can now draw this all as one move. Okay? So what we've actually gone and done is we've gone up, we've come down, we've come up and failed to take this particular high, right? Which means all of this move here was actually all internal, meaning we could even take this down here, right? I've had a nice run, I've had a very sideways pullback, and I've had a nice run taking out these highs. This looks a bit of a mess, but the general idea is I'm giving myself clues as to where we are in the current range and what's going on for the current range, right? So let me get rid of these drawings now. I can see that from this low, that's my kind of point of focus, my area to focus. Right, what I want to do is get rid of all of these. Actually, let's see if I can come all the way down to here and do that to that, that to there, and get rid of all of them. Okay, and I don't care. There we go. So what I'm now doing is I'm trying to focus in on what this move from that low, given that we know it's an uptrend. Right? Now, again, you know, just for clarity, this is something else you can do and do for yourself. Is, you know, this is an uptrend. Right? Now, if you don't know that, you can't see that, then obviously it's going back to the basics rather than, you know, the bigger picture. But all I'm looking for is now what goes on inside of you. Right? So I'm not even going to bother labeling this up on the weekly. What I want to do is just put a line for myself. Right? And this is, again, a type of thing that you've got to get comfortable yourself in terms of how you do this and what you do for this. That line for me now is going to represent where I start my daily analysis. So let's come all the way down there. I want to keep that one on, actually. So it's this one. On that one there, up to this one here, and then get rid of that. Okay, so I'm going to keep the text on, and I'm going to say on this particular point, I'll find the text now. At this particular point, I'm in a weekly up move, like this. Weekly up move, strong high mid. Right? Oh, I can put that next line down there to there, like this. Okay. Okay. So all I'm doing is just I'm adding to my notes and I'm just kind of firing through one step at a time. Now what I've done is I've brought myself out to this 1 day time frame, and I'm starting from this particular low. Right. So I've clearly got my low. I can delete my line. What I then want to do is I'm just going to stick the pen tool back or the brush tool back on. So there's my first swing low, there's my swing high, there's actually a higher low. We don't take anything out there until we get to this one, right? Now, if I was to calculate this to this, it's not this one, it's actually this one, right? So my current range is basically there to there. Then obviously we break that range again. If I look at the prior highs, which was obviously this level here, then I'm again looking at the same point. So I'm just following the same logic all the way through to find where I am, right? So I now have obviously a new low. I then come up, I have a new low again. And, you know, as you get quicker at doing this, guys, you're going to start to notice, right, this type of move. So if I then come up and I break this high, this obviously becomes the next low. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky, because you could argue, well, if this is a low here and this is a high, once that high is broken, I want to be looking at anything from this swing high to the prior swing low, right? But based on this previous swing high. So my range is currently here, right? So what I have right now is a very similar story. I now have a strong swing low. The reason that that one is strong is that broke the prior swing high. But this one would be deemed as a weak swing high, right? So as you can see, we've now flipped from being a strong weekly and a strong monthly high to now being a weak daily high, right? And the reason for that is obviously if we are expecting further upside momentum, we can still go up without changing or breaking the weekly and the monthly system, right, or protocols. So I'm going to get rid of all of these right now. I'm just going to mark up, where I see the current situation. So let me get rid of all of them. I'm going to look at that and I'm going to say to myself, on the daily time frame, I now know, seems to lag a little bit when I do this. I think it is OBS. So let's put the trend line on. I know that I have this here as my low, and I currently have this as my high. So again, you can see I'm not making anything overly complex. I'm following the same patterns, following the same rules. Right? Now I'm in a position where I've gone from the monthly, and I know what my monthly story is. My monthly's pointing up, my weekly's pointing up. I'm looking at the daily, right? And without trying to put, words or ideas or thoughts into your own heads, is look at the type of impulsive move we had that took out obviously the prior highs, right? Then you have this kind of limp move back down, followed by green candle, green candle, green candle, right? The suggestion for me is, knowing that the draw is to the upside on the monthly, we potentially have more to go on the monthly. When I come down to this daily time frame, I've just identified this as a weak high. Weak highs get broken. The draw on liquidity is to the upside. Right? Where is my bias? My bias is to the upside. Where is the draw on liquidity? To the upside. Where is the weak part of the range? The weak part is the high of the range. Okay, so all of a sudden, everything now is starting to point up in that sense. Okay, so I'm looking at this and I'm saying to myself, well, up, up, and more up seems to be the obvious play here, right? Now, let me grab all of them. Get rid of that. So now I'm looking at that from a daily perspective. Now again, similar thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the current low. That low there. Let's put that straight. That low there. Right. Maybe I can even change the color on this one just for showing you guys. Put it blue. That low there is a low that I kind of can confirm. We had the pullback candle. This obviously has gone higher both sides, and therefore I kind of like that. We kind of have this as the prior swing high. Right? We've now kind of put in a low based on the fact that we've changed the character locally. Right? So at this point in time, we've changed the character to the upside, but we don't have any confirmation of a swing high kind of in situ yet. Right? So what I can see is that we're currently inside the weekly range that we've identified. We have a pullback on the daily, and the pullback is now potentially entering its next leg to the upside. Right? So again, similar thing, drop down the time frame, and as you can see, right, all I'm doing is I'm walking through the logic, kind of step by step. Now, what I want to see on this is working my premise, right? I'm working the logic from this low because we're in an uptrend. So we come up, technically we change the character on this particular move. Right? We have this as a swing high. We then pull back from that swing high, right? Obviously we break to the next swing high, which means I can confirm my swing low. Right? We then do exactly the same thing. There's my next swing low, there's my next swing high. Right? So all the way through, all I'm doing is I'm following the notion. We're an uptrend, uptrend, uptrend. We got higher highs and higher lows. Right? We then create another one. which means my current range is sat there and here. So right now on a 4-hour time frame, we have a 1-day bias up, we have a weekly bias up, we have a monthly bias up, we have a draw to the upside. Everything right now on these higher time frames are all pointing to the upside. So if we're in a move down right now, what do you think we're likely to do? Do you think we're likely to kind of carry on all the way down? Do you think we're likely to come so far and reverse to the upside because that's where the draw on liquidity is? You start to see that this is giving you, a very simplistic set of rules to follow, yeah? So what I want to do now is I want to look at this and say to myself, look, I can kind of see all of the logic that I have now here, right? Everything that I've got in there is making sense to me that we're currently in an uptrend move with a current pullback down on this 4-hour situation, right? Now, if that's the case, from the 4-hour, I know I have this as my swing range. Right, let's put that as a different color again. Let's put this to orange. Right? So what I now have is I'm inside of this range. I'm only looking for opportunities, ideally, to the long side based on my bigger time frame bias. Right? Now that doesn't mean that I can only buy this. I could actually short this on the smaller time frame bias. But based on that, what do I see as soon as I move into this 1-hour time frame? But what I'm seeing is very similar to this here. Right? We had a drop, we failed to take the high, change the character, which means that's the start of your pullback trend. Now obviously at this particular point there's no real change, not until this level, right, of the move to the upside. This is another reason that I like the move to the upside more, that if we had a small move inside of you, and you probably will on a smaller time frame, then obviously that would have converted this from bearish to bullish at this particular point, right? Now on a 15-minute or a 5-minute, you probably see that an awful lot sooner. Now, with all that being said, what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to work with the same set of rules, and this being obviously mechanical. I'm looking at the mechanical structuring, and I'm saying to myself, okay, we're in a situation right now where ultimately we can see that with all of these moves, we are currently bullish with a current pullback phase. Where are we likely to pull back to? Now, this is where I can start to get a little bit more technical. This level of being technical is we have the final demand zone, and that demand zone clearly done one of two things. The demand zone ultimately took the price above and beyond, which is one of the criteria for it being demand, right? And obviously now we've created, even more extreme highs, right, taking out the bigger picture. So that for me is definitely one level of demand. We got a little gap sitting in there, which means there's obviously liquidity sat in there as well. Right? Now, when these two things overlap, I tend to like or prefer this a little bit more. Right? Now, obviously, with this view, and in this particular view, what we've now done is we've kind of facilitated a pullback move, just like this and just like this, right? Because my bias is still to the upside. So what I'm looking for is not shorts from here to here, right? I'm looking for potential longs from there, all the way. Okay. Now, obviously, you can take smaller trades again, and you can come, but the same logic and the same rules and the same, kind of analysis application. You just follow it through, and you follow it through. Let me see if I can get rid of some of these. I'll get rid of all the brush marks. Sorry for the lag or the delay. There's definitely an issue with my OBS speed. I think I'm going to reduce the video quality to ultimately give a faster speed in terms of the the brush tools and the marking up and so on. Let's get it all in one go. This is how long the delay actually is looking at it. There we go. So now with that being said, right, I know the whole idea of the mechanical was to go from 3 time frames ideally. But what I wanted to do is just to show you that whether it's a monthly or whether it's a 1 minute, right? It's still the same concept, still the same tools, the same kind of identity to the strategy. So now down on a 15 minute, I could possibly refine this a little bit more. We know we had a gap on the play just above this, right? The reason I think we can refine this here is it's not until this one candle that demand truly steps in, creating the move that took out these highs, right? So for me, this is probably more of the logical area for some kind of pullback to come, right? Now, again, this doesn't mean I'm just going to put an order in here and walk away. Sometimes you'll see me post posts, right? And what I'll do on the posts is I'll have positions like this where, I might put it, say, the middle of this. I might put, a take profit, or the stop loss is kind of in situ, kind of in ready. And the only reason I do this is more for myself, not for you, right? Is I just want to understand, there's a 6.8% trade on the table there, right? Now, that doesn't mean that I'm just going to enter because I've put this there. What it does mean is that when we get to this kind of region, I'm going to start to look for aspects of what we do and what we can do in terms of an entry point, right? Now, this obviously on a 15 minute, I know that my 1 hour is down. I know that I've got a nice demand level down low. What I want to do is exactly the same thing. I want to come down. There's my first low. There's my first high. There's obviously the one that broke the character. That obviously changed the bigger picture character there. We then had a pullback, right? We've dropped again. As we drop, we come back for the retest, and we've dropped again, breaking this, right? Which means right now my current range is on a 15-minute time frame. I have this high here because it was the one that changed from here, right? So it was this one. And then let's change that to a different color again. Let's use this as maybe purple, right? And then ultimately where we are right now is, although I've probably got argument in here for this, I kind of like obviously here, and I know this is the wrong way to do it. I'm just showing you where my current range is set. And therefore, if I'm taking any measurements right now, although I can't confirm this low, what I can do by using this low is obviously give me some idea in, some clue rather than an idea in terms of where my 50% of the range is, what I've actually got there. Now, a couple of things that I do have is I have this last supply here, right? This is obviously a 15-minute supply level, and the reason that I can class this as a supply is that we broke the structural low, right? There's no reason that we need to go back up here, although we can. This was ultimately a retest of this one, right? So they kind of overlap each other. This one could be a retest of that one, so again, there's an argument for that. We've got a gap just underneath it, so there's an argument for that. But ultimately, look, at this particular time frame, what I think you're going to see on even smaller time frames is potentially something that brings us back up to this kind of area. Right? It doesn't have to come all the way because of gap. Then ultimately down here, that gives us then fuel to ultimately drive up and through, right? And that's the kind of move that I'm looking for. That doesn't mean that I'm going to go and take a long here. It doesn't mean that I want to take a long there, right? The point being is, this is my bias, this is my direction, this is my thought process right now. All I'm doing is just following the same logic, following the same logic, following the same logic, right? Right now, this to me is a pullback phase of a larger uptrend, right? Now, the beauty of doing this and following this notion is, even if I wanted to take a long from here, what I'm looking at is, what have we done? Have we actually crossed into, which we kind of tagged the top of? There's a slight gap there. Is that enough for me to be excited? Probably not. Right? On a smaller time frame, I can zoom in, I can come to a 5, I can come to a 1, and I can look for this, right? But the bias right now is, I don't see us getting down here without any more additional fuel to come down. So my bias would be, we've had an hyper extension, we've come through the range, right? And the range obviously was this one here. So just to confirm, the range was obviously this low that we see in there. right? And therefore, after breaking the prior range, you're likely to want to pull back into the range. So that pull back into the range to kind of continue on down is the next logical step for me. Then I'll drop into the 5 minute, then I'll drop into the 1 minute, and so on. So on. And then keep doing this and keep doing this and keep doing this, right? But if you're not interested in that 1 minute and 5 minute type entry, there's nothing stopping you seeing these on a 15-minute time frame. You know, if I was to trade this on a 15-minute time frame, my next logical play, my next logical entry here, right, would simply be a short position. Let's just assume that we can get somewhere in there, right? Let's just assume that we can go just above that gap, and let's just assume we want the 50% market. So there's options in every element, in every aspect, every position within the chart. The real question and the real point comes down to where you want to take that, right? What time factor that you're working with, what scale you're working on, and therefore putting all these kind of pieces together, nothing's changed out from that monthly to the 15-minute time frame. I've just walked you through the analysis step by step by step. I know this is a longer video, a lot longer than I wanted to do, but I kind of feel like the value's there, guys, for you to see this and for you to understand how you use this to your advantage, right? So just keep following the same rules, keep following the same logic, and then eventually what you'll start to do is you'll start to have these ranges identified for yourselves. You'll start to be trading, you know, you'll start looking at the trade with the trend. And then ultimately, when you start to see logical reasons for the turnaround, you can align the much bigger time frames with your local time frames. And then obviously once you've got 2, 3, 4 of them, depending on the time frames you're looking at, you know, for me, if I can see that right now the weekly and the monthly is in alignment, at the moment the daily is kind of in pullback mode, right? If that daily was to switch to the upside, based on the 4 hour, based on the 1 hour, based on a 15 minute, then obviously for me, this particular trade long means that I'm not taking it long from, you know, from this blue box and saying, oh, I'm hoping for this. What I'm actually doing is looking for a long situation that I could even ride for the much, much bigger time frame. Okay, so based on that 15, if I come up with my monthly figures back on, where is my monthly supply zone that I've actually gone and talked about? Well, there's my monthly supply zone. Right? So if I was to take that now as a position, wrong one. If I was to take that as a position from there, based on that monthly time frame, right? And again, I'm not saying this is what you need to do, but that becomes a 34 type R, right? Now, there's nothing stopping you taking that because the chances are if you break through these highs, it's going to carry on going up to those highs. So there's all sorts of ways and all sorts of methods and techniques that you could use inside of the technique. But the longs and shorts is the technique is the same technique kind of over and over and over again. All right. So I hope this video helps, you know, at least some of you. Obviously, you know, I'd rather the messages, if I'm honest, rather than being direct messages, I'd rather the messages be in the group. Regardless of how silly or daft, or even if you think that you sound dull by asking them, you know, we were all beginners once, right? We're all still learning, including myself and Paul. The real value for being in a group like this is that all of the answers are kind of the answers for everyone, and any of the questions are probably similar questions to other people have. So I'm not doing it to save myself work or Paul work in terms of not replying directly, but I'd rather it be kind of out in the open so that everyone has the same value and the same takeaway from this. All right. So again, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you on the next stream. Cheers up.